Last time we discussed the reign of Henry III and his relationship with Simon de Montfort, and then his son Edward I. Now, Edward I was one of the biggest badass cunts of all the English kings in history. He is depicted in the movie Braveheart as a tyrannical, hard fuck. There's no question about him being a hard fuck. He certainly was. As a young man, he killed Simon de Montfort in battle and had his balls cut off. And as a young man, as a king, he and his wife, Eleanor of Castile, both took part in a crusade. While on the crusade, some cunt tried to kill the king, and he actually killed the cunt that was trying to kill him. What Edward I is most famous for is his attempts to conquer all of the island of Britain. He wanted to take over Scotland and Wales. His excuse for attacking Wales was quite simple, that he claimed to be the Lord of Wales and the overlord, and said that all the princes and lords in Wales had to bow down and suck his cock. But this Prince of Wales, Llewellyn, didn't want to do that, so they said, fuck you, Edward. Edward invaded Wales and took it over and conquered it and built loads of castles there, and shat on the Welsh people and fucked them. And then he said, my son is going to be the Prince of Wales, and from now on the son of the King of England is going to be Prince of Wales. And that was like a fucking insult to Welsh people. And the Prince of Wales still now is always the son of the king. So that was a bit shit for the Welsh. If you're English and you don't like the Welsh, which you're a cunt, then maybe you think it's good, but it was a bit shit for the Welsh people that they got fucked over by Edward I. So quite a bit of a cunt. Edward then exploited an opportunity to try to take over Scotland. He was related to the kings of Scotland through marriage of his sister, and the kingdom of Scotland got into a situation where they didn't have any heirs to the throne that were legitimate and which were closely related to the one that just died. So there were these different competing factions claiming the throne from relatives of people that were related to the monarchy from hundreds of years ago. And Edward pretended that he would be like the referee in these arguments and decide which one was the best to be King of Scotland, but actually what he was trying to do was take over Scotland himself and make himself the overlord and ruler of Scotland. And there was a fellow called John Balliol, and Edward said, well, he's the man to be a king. But then he tried to just use this Balliol as a puppet just to do what he wanted. while he was the one really in control. If you've seen the movie Braveheart, there are a lot of historical inaccuracies in that film, but the basic gist of it is correct, that there was a rebellion by the Scottish against the English rule in Scotland, and William Wallace was one of the great leaders of the Scots in their rebellions, and he was betrayed and captured and killed by the English. After he died, the King of England, Edward, died, and his son, Edward II, tried to continue to subjugate Scotland, and the new leader of the Scottish was a man called Robert the Bruce, who called himself the King of Scotland. And Robert the Bruce had a great battle against Edward II at a place called Bannockburn in the year 1314, and the Scottish completely won that and destroyed the English army, and Edward had to fuck off back to England, and he felt like a right cunt because his father had been a badass and he was just a little twat. Edward II is rumoured and believed by most historians to have been gay. Even if this is true, it didn't stop him from having quite a lot of children with his wife. Edward II was married to this French princess called Isabella of France. Isabella was the daughter of a very, very badass French king called Philip IV, who was called Philip the Handsome, and was also called the Iron King because he was such a badass cunt. And he was the same French king who destroyed the Knights Templar just so he could steal their fucking money. And he wasn't to be fucked with. Isabella was a tough woman. She took after her father. She was ruthless and ambitious. She didn't like being married to Edward because Edward preferred his friends to her. He had these male friends and he just showered them with gifts and with his time and affection and his love, and he treated his wife like shit. He didn't like her at all. He wasn't interested in doing anything with her, although he did shag her quite a lot. Must have done because they had loads of kids, unless they weren't his, we don't know, but they certainly didn't belong to William Wallace, because when William Wallace was alive she was only like 11 years old, so either William Wallace was a paedophile or that didn't happen. So anyway, while Edward I was alive, he was ashamed of his son Edward II, well, Edward II to be, and thought he was a bit of a twat. And Edward II did actually turn out to be a bit of a rubbish king. Edward had a friend called Piers Gaveston, not to be confused with Piers Morgan. And Piers Gaveston was someone that King Edward I thought was a bad influence on his son. So Edward I had exiled him and told him to fuck off to France and never come back again. And young Edward was really pissed off because he fucking loved this Piers Gaveston guy and thought he was the dog's bollocks, and probably bumming him. They were probably shagging each other, I reckon. And as soon as Edward I died, the first thing Edward II did was get Piers Gaveston to come back to England. Now this was very unpopular with all the nobles and the powerful people in England, because they all thought that Piers Gaveston was a twat. And they didn't like that he was a favourite of Edward. It was also bad for Edward's relationship with his wife, because Edward would take stuff from his wife, her jewellery and stuff, and give it to Piers Gaveston. Edward I had married twice. His first marriage had been to Eleanor of Castile, and Edward II was from that marriage. But after she had died, the old Edward I had then married the sister of the old Iron King of France, who was the niece of, who was the aunt of his daughter. Anyway, fuck it. And with her name is Margaret of France. With Margaret of France, Edward I had two sons. One of them became Earl of Norfolk, and the other one was Earl of I can't fucking remember. I think it was Nottingham. With the fucking check, that fucking went wrong. Anyway, and also Edward I had a brother who was called Edmund Crouchback, and he was made Earl of Lancaster, and the Crouchback also had a son who was also the Earl of Lancaster. And Lancaster was really pissed off with King Edward II, and he thought he was a bit of a prick because he was bumming Gaveston and giving all his stuff and time to Gaveston and not giving stuff to the family members who were closer to the throne. And this was a theme that developed quite often, because these people who were brothers of a king, or second or third sons of a king, felt really entitled to always have all the power and money and wealth. And sometimes when a nephew or a nephew's son or somebody became king, that person wanted to do stuff for their personal friends and not for these important relatives. So there was often this struggle between kings and their uncles and great uncles and cousins. Anyway, so Lancaster actually fucked Edward over by not supporting him at the Battle of Bannockburn in Scotland, and that was a real big mistake because it led to the English losing, and Edward didn't forget that Lancaster had been a cunt. Queen Isabella at the beginning tried hard to make her relationship with Edward work, but it just wouldn't work because he wasn't really interested in her, and all his time was with Gaveston. So anyway, a group of people, his lords, got together and they fucking murdered Gaveston and said, Edward, stop doing this favouritism stuff and stop being gay. Start shagging your wife a bit more and give stuff to us, not your friends. So anyway, Gaveston found somebody else to be friends with, and it was this guy called Despenser, and Despenser had a father who, through his son, influenced the king. So the Despensers, the father and son, became the new favourites of the king, and the queen started really getting fed up with the situation, pissed off with being treated like shit, basically. And she was really fucking pissed off. Now, Isabella had 3 brothers in France, and these 3 French princes were married to. They weren't married actually. They were engaged to be married to. No, they weren't fucking married. They were fucking married, and basically all the wives of all 3 of them were fucking cheating and fucking around, and Isabella in England found out about it, and she went there and spilled the fucking beans to her father and told him that they were sluts, and they all got fucking put in prison, and their boyfriends got executed and shit. The shit really hit the fucking fan, and this contributed to her feeling of being pissed off with being married to someone who was gay and treated her like shit, and she met this cunt called Mortimer, and Mortimer was a rebel who fucking was rebelling against Edward, and was in prison and escaped prison, and got together with Isabella, and they started fucking and shagging, all the same thing, and they both went to France together, and she said, I'm not going back to England until you get rid of that dispenser and his father, because I'm the queen and I'm the one that should be getting the king's dick and not these blokes. And Edward sort of said, well, fucking stay in France then, you stupid bitch, if you want, I don't give a fuck. And Isabella's eldest brother didn't last 5 fucking seconds after her father died, and basically the brothers just fucking didn't last 5 seconds each, and the second brother died not long after the first one, and the third one was king then, and his name was Charles the Fourth of France, and Isabella was hanging out with him, and he said, look, you got to fucking go back to England because I don't want to have a war with England over you, you stupid bitch. Fuck off back to England, will ya? Anyway, she got together with Mortimer and this cunt called Robert of Artois, and they arranged for her to go to Hainaut, I don't know how to spell it, or Hainaut, which is in like Belgium and Netherlands, that area, and she got some support from these cunts up there, and she agreed that she would marry that cunt's daughter to her son, also called Edward, if they helped her to invade England and take over the country and depose Edward. So she did that, and they went to England, and her leading this army, she overthrew Edward. She killed the dispensers and cut their knobs off, and that. And then she and her boyfriend Mortimer, they captured Edward and they stuck him in prison, and then they fucking killed him by shoving a red hot poker up his arsehole, and they made their son, who was only 15 or 16 years old, the new king, Edward, and then Isabella and Mortimer were sort of ruling England in his name. And but when Edward got a bit older, when he was 18, he said, fucking Mortimer's a cunt who murdered my father. So he went in and grabbed him and had him killed, and his mother said, fucking hell. And this was Edward III. Edward III turned out to be a massive badass, nothing like his father and quite a lot like his grandfathers. And Edward really was fucking not to be fucked with. Anyway, Isabella's last brother died, and she was the last surviving child of the old Iron King of France, but a cousin took over as King of France, and she and her son said, well, that's not fucking right, because our claim is better than theirs. So Edward also, if you remember that, and we'll come back to this later, remember that the English had historically owned lots of lands in France, and they still had a few left, and the French had started fucking over them, taking them over during the reign of Edward II, and Edward III wanted to take them back. So as a pretext for invading France, going to war with France, he claimed the French throne through his mother, and said that his claim to the French throne was better than the one of the man who was King of France now, who was called Philip VI, or Philip the Fortunate. And this was the start of the 100 Years' War. So I'll fucking leave it there and continue the next one.